Hello, welcome everybody. And for those of you, I see you in there, Fred. I would like to remind you that I do not do 5 or 10 minutes of people having to wait as the stream is starting. I go pretty much straight into it after 1 minute. And there's a lot to set up. I have a lot more to set up than other people, particularly today when there's maps and miniatures involved. Okay, I'm going to put up a poll for those of you who want to take part in that poll. How's it going, Steve? By the way, Fred Hubber is a patron. Anyway, look, today is all about combat mechanics for Dungeons and Dragons 5e, and I'll be doing a presentation today. I'll be using slides. I will be transferring over and using maps, miniatures, and dice to demonstrate stuff. And this is certainly an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if you want to ask questions, that's not going to be a problem. So my suggestion to you is get your questions ready. I'm going to do this as quickly as I can in the presentation, and I will also be, demonstrating some stuff. So yeah, get your questions ready, get some food and drink, make sure you're comfortable, and we'll rock into this. Anyway, let's go. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Weller, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Oh my gosh, didn't you just say How to RPG? Yes, that's right, How to Role-Playing Games. But I do Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, I used to do a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and I kind of still do a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, not necessarily 5e. But today is all about Dungeons and Dragons 5e. For those of you who are looking for that, that's what you get. Okay, so this is lesson 2, basic combat mechanics. I'm going to be going over the basics of combat so that you got a pretty good idea of what's going on. Now, for those of you who are familiar with this, hey, feel free to drop in your perspective by all means. I'm here just to help those who need assistance along the way. Anyway, overview. I'll be covering combat initiative, how to do the turn order, types of actions, weapon attacks, casting a spell, the types of spell casting, the dash action, the disengage action, the help action, the dodge action, the search action, and the use an object action. Those are the things I'm covering today. If you are seeing anything here that is not fitting into what you were hoping for, that is the next live stream, which will be next week. I'm covering these things today. So, and I also have some miscellaneous recommendations I always give out. Now, my objectives is to explain everything as clearly as I possibly can in terms of how these mechanics work that I've just discussed. Okay, and then I'm going to demonstrate that process. I'm going to use maps, miniatures, and dice. I'm going to allow you a practice. I can't do a practice playthrough because YouTube has still not got themselves organized, so I can use the platform in an educational manner. Really, it's not quite there. But in any case, I will certainly be answering your questions and doing any demonstrations that require assistance or a little bit more highlighting on. Okay, let's get into it. Let's go into combat initiative. Normally, the Dungeon Master opens a combat encounter with a description of what the monster is doing to threaten the characters, unless the characters are threatening the monsters or the NPCs, and they will ask for you to roll initiative. This is usually your opening. So a description, roll initiative. Okay, now, how do you roll initiative? Initiative rolls are a special type of ability check that is the result of adding your dexterity modifier, okay, to a 20-sided dice roll. All player characters have to do this. All the monsters need to roll initiative. And they are all placed into order from the highest number to the lowest number, with the highest initiative or highest number starting first in combat, unless anyone is surprised. So anyone surprised doesn't get to act or take a turn in the first round of combat. If you're not surprised, you get to act in the first round as you are following your initiative. So that's the process of your initiative. There are types of actions in a combat, and so what I want to do is uncover that. But again, the calculation for initiative is roll a 20-sided dice, add your dexterity modifier, which may be in fact an initiative modifier, but monsters don't have an initiative modifier. They only have a dexterity modifier on the stat block, okay, for the monster. And that gives you the initiative check value, the total result. So that's how you calculate it. Nice and easy. Okay, types of actions. What are they? So it's broken up into the action, the bonus action, which is not the same as the action, movement, okay, or move, interactions, and reactions. So there are 5 different types. An action is the main thing a creature can do, whether that's a character or a monster, with a wide range of possibilities. These can include, but are not exclusively set to this, but they can include such as making an attack, casting a spell, and maneuvers, okay, unless otherwise stated. Sometimes these things might get changed if you have a special feature. Bonus actions are not the same as an action. It's a completely different thing. And this is where this probably shouldn't be called a bonus action, but Dungeons & Dragons 5e does this. Okay, it's a special type of action. It is usually linked to a special ability or to a spell or a particular type of spell. Not all spells are a bonus action, or some other feature that states that it is classified as a bonus action. It is always different to your main action. Okay. Next, we have movement. Moving is the creature's ability to change position around the battlefield by either walking, running, flying, crawling along the ground, swimming through water, or climbing a tree or a rock or something else. So that's movement, okay? You get to do that. Interactions. An interaction, the thing about an interaction is it's a really quick thing that you can do, or a task that you can perform as part of your creature's main action or your movement. It's usually linked to that. You can only do one of these. Then we have our reaction. Our reaction is an instant response to a trigger of some kind. So, which it may occur on, and it usually does, on someone else's turn. Okay, so an opportunity attack would be something like this, or a spell such as shield that you would cast is a reaction. Somebody attacks you, you cast shield, and it's done on somebody else's turn, not on your turn. Okay, it's usually on a different creature's turn. Now, the thing with your action, bonus action, movement, interaction, and reaction is you only get one of each of these per round. Not per turn, per round. Okay, unless there is a rule that specifies otherwise. That's how it works. Okay, so that's our types of actions. But we're not finished there. We have got attack types. There are a bunch of different attack types. Your melee weapon attack is made at close quarters, and this is usually performed with something like a sword or an axe, a mace, or a spear. These are things where you basically trying to jab somebody, slash at somebody, or bash somebody with it. It's a melee close quarter weapon. Another type of attack type is your ranged weapon attack, and this is made at short range or at long range. Okay, you're usually not right up in the face of somebody, although you could be. It's not a good idea, but you could be. And you do this with a bow, a crossbow, a sling, or a gun, if you have guns in your campaign. Next, the throw-in weapon attack. This is where you throw a weapon at somebody or something, and it has usually a short range. You'll almost always find that thrown weapons have a short range. They do not have a particularly long range to them. This is throwing a dagger at something, throwing a hand axe, throwing a javelin, even throwing a spear. A light hammer can be thrown, and even a net is thrown as well. Okay, these are throw-in weapon attacks. And then lastly, we have unarmed strikes, or basically punching, kicking, biting, stuff like that. So unarmed strikes, kneeing, elbowing, groining, things like that. So this is made at close quarters. You have to be right up in their face. You're going to use your fists, your feet, your elbows, knees, heads, stuff like that. That's your unarmed strike. Now that we've covered that, let's have a look at some magic stuff. Magic, well, it's casting spells. Casting spells in terms of the types of spells that you can cast. Again, it's broken up and looks very similar to weapon attacks. So you can have a melee attack spell. This is made at close quarters with an attack roll targeting the enemy's armor class. One of the things you will notice is when it comes to using a weapon attack or making an attack, it is always an attack roll versus armor class. But with casting a spell, it's not always making an attack roll versus armor class. In the case of a melee attack spell, these are at close quarters, and they do involve an attack roll targeting the enemy's armor class. This is something like Booming Blade, Shocking Grasp, Inflict Wounds, Flame Blade, and Spiritual Weapon. Spiritual Weapon's kind of a special one because it's not designated from your position, it's designated from wherever the spiritual weapon has been positioned. But they're all good examples of it. In any case, they work the same. Alright, next we have ranged attack spells. And these are made at short range and at long range with an attack roll targeting the enemy's armor class again. These are things like Eldritch Blast, Ray of Frost, Firebolt, Guiding Bolt, and Chaos Bolt. These are some examples. Then we have a different range. We have the melee saving throw spell. Okay, these are made at close range, but they involve a saving throw that targets the enemy. Okay, that's how they work. An example of a melee saving throw spell is Bestow Curse, and it's probably one of the very few that I can think of. I don't think there's any others that come to mind straight away. We also have ranged saving throw spells. These are made at short range and at long range with a saving throw targeting the enemy. Now, an example of this is Firebolt, Fireball, should I say. Fireball. Fireball requires you to make a dexterity saving throw to avoid taking burning damage. Lightning Bolt requires a dexterity saving throw. Sacred Flame also requires a dexterity saving throw. Toll the Dead. These are all ranged saving throw spells. Then lastly, the spell that automatically works. These are called automatic success spells. They don't require an attack roll, they don't require a saving throw, they just work. And examples of these are things like Prestidigitation, Mage Hand, where you get to move something around. Prestidigitation is like the Swiss Army knife of Dungeons and Dragons. It does all sorts of things. Light, which creates light. Mending, which repairs something that's broken, as long as it's not too badly broken. Message, which allows you to communicate with somebody. Magic Missile, which allows you to make an attack. But guess what? You don't have to make an attack roll. You don't have to worry about a saving throw. It's just going to hit. Roll your damage. And then lastly, Druidcraft, which is kind of like the Druid's poor man's version of Prestidigitation, or very, very niche in any case. So that is all of the different types of spells that you could potentially cast, and some examples of what they sort of, what ones will fall into that bracket. Now there are some basic actions in combat that you can perform, and these are, and I'm going to go through them fairly quickly, is the dash action. Okay, a dash requires you use your main action, and you can move your character or the creature or the monster, their speed, as extra movement. So an example of this would be, if you have a speed of 30 feet, you might use your movement to move 30 feet, okay, but you can also use your main action to move another 30 feet, okay. That's how it works. Right, we also have the disengage action. For those of you who want to get out of combat, don't want to get smacked in the face, stabbed, bludgeoned by weapons or maces or clubs, disengage is the one for you. Disengage requires that you use your main action again in conjunction with your movement, right? So your character or your monster doesn't provoke an attack of opportunity. So when you move away from them, out of the threatened square, you will not provoke an attack of opportunity. So you're using your movement in combination, in conjunction with your action, and you're taking the disengage action. The problem when you take disengage and you're using your action to do so is you won't be able to make an attack on your turn. You'll have to wait until the next round. So that's your disengage. Now there are some exceptions. There are some character classes that don't necessarily have to use their main action to disengage, but they are specific examples. They are not the standard rule. Okay, next we have dodge. For those of you who remember the first Matrix, dodge is what we're talking about here. Dodge requires you use your main action for your character or your monster, and it makes it more difficult for an attack to hit you, okay? And so what is going to happen is when you take that dodge action with your action, all the enemies have disadvantage on their attack rolls. So basically it means they have disadvantage on their attack rolls. And you also wind up granting yourself advantage on any dexterity saving throws as well. So if you have to make a dexterity saving throw, you're going to get advantage on that roll. Okay, and advantage is when you roll 2 dice, you take the highest result. Disadvantage is you roll 2 dice, you take the lowest result off the dice. Okay, and you add it to whatever your bonus is. So disadvantage on attack rolls, but it grants advantage on a dexterity saving throw. Okay, so that's your dodge. Very handy, probably not used as much as people should, but in any case, that's beside the point. We're not here about that. Let's talk about these different roles. So next is the help action. Help requires you use your main action for your character or your monster. And what it does is it allows you to aid another creature's completion of a task by granting them advantage on their next ability check or their next attack roll. That's what it's designed to do. So you give up your main action, you're giving that up, okay? And by doing so, you grant advantage to somebody else's attack roll or an ability check that they're trying to perform, provided you're trying to assist them. You need to be in the right position to do this, but that's the intention behind it. You are trying to make it easier for somebody else to complete a task. Right, next, the search action. Possibly one of the silliest actions that exist in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. It's there for a reason, but it's also not a particularly good action to use. Search requires you use your main action for your character or your monster, and by doing so, during a battle, during combat, you are trying to detect or find something that has been hidden or hard to notice. And what you do is you make a wisdom or perception check, or you make an intelligence investigation check, whichever the game master or dungeon master thinks is appropriate. And this is going to be contested by a stealth check or a dexterity check by whoever is hiding or is hard to notice. So the search action is deliberately there for combat. Outside of combat, the search action really doesn't have the same effect. It doesn't matter if you're using an action outside of combat, because we don't break up our game into actions and bonus actions outside of combat. Combat is what we're dealing with here. So that's just in combat. Next, and the last one I want to cover for today, and that is use an object. So use an object is really it's something that gets used a lot, and it's probably because you're trying to do too much with your character or your monster. So use an object requires you use your main action, okay? Your main action is getting used so that your character or your monster can manipulate an object in the environment, or manipulate the environment in some way, or interact with it in some way, okay? And the only time that you really have to use an object as an action, your main action, is when you have used up your free interaction. An interaction is just like use an object. This would be something like picking up a stone off the ground, drawing a sword, putting your sword back into your sheath, things like that. But once you've used up one of those during your turn, you are now looking at, if you want to do anything else that's very similar, you're now having to use your main action and use an object. There are also some tasks where you can't use your interaction, and it has to be a main action. And the reason being is whatever task you have stipulated, the game master has deemed it to require too much effort and time to perform. You can't perform it quickly because that's what an interaction is for. So first off, we use an object is a main action, and we use it if we've already used our interaction and we want to do something very similar again in the same turn, or whatever we're trying to do is going to require too much effort and too much time. So that's how use an object works. Now, every time I run this program, I like to give some miscellaneous recommendations, and I'm going to do the same today. And these are the things I have to say. When unsure what to do and how to apply the game rules, think about it this way. Is it an ability check? Is it a skill check? Is it an attack roll? Or is it a saving throw? Those are the only mechanics you really need to have to figure out everything. Everything is determined. So when you need something to work, decide, is it an ability check, a skill check, an attack roll, or a saving throw? If you don't see any chance of failure, you do not need to worry about any of those, okay, and forget about it. So, as I said, otherwise, anything else that doesn't have a chance of success, of failure, and is eventually going to be successful, just consider it an automatic success, okay? And when you think something makes no sense, that it could not be performed, so somebody says, I would like to lasso the moon and pull it down to Earth, and you say, that's not possible. Automatic failure. Okay, there is no attack. There's no attack roll. There's no saving throw. No skill check or ability check when they try to perform something that's impossible to actually perform. And even with a fantasy role-playing game, there are going to be some limits, and your players are going to have to try to work within them. And if they don't figure out the first time, I'm sure the second or third time they will start to realize what will work and what won't work. So that's everything I have in terms of what I wanted to present today. Anything additional, I'll be covering next week, where we'll be covering complex combat mechanics, where I start going over some of the other rules that I haven't discussed in detail today. I hope this was useful to you, and if it was, fantastic. I want to thank my patrons who support me so I can keep running this program, where I talk about various game rules from different systems. Today it's 5e. And I will hopefully be expanding that into a lot more role-playing games over time. So thank you for doing so. Thank you for watching and listening, and all the best with your 5e game. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. All right, I'm not gone. I'm here. I'm ready. Let's have a look at chat first, and then I will go in and I'm going to start doing a little bit of demonstration. I haven't done any demonstration for a while, so a bit of practice. Live stream demonstration is always completely terrifying. So you'll I will do my best to answer your questions. So throw your questions out there now so that I can cover them now. If you have something you want to discuss, like house rules, I'm happy to talk about that as well. Not a problem. It's all good. Anyway, have you played Dungeons & Dragons 5e in the last month? Yes, 43%. Okay, well that kind of makes sense. If you're watching a video on 5e, you probably are playing 5e. No, 43%. Interesting. All right, let's jump in around there. A few more votes going in. Okay, how's it going, Steve? How are you? Fred Hubbard is a patron. I've mentioned that before. Yes, so for those of you who are wondering about the comment before that Fred Hubbard was saying, yes, Fred likes to pull my chain. Yes, we do have the same first name. Okay. Oh dear. You going good? Cool. You were waiting for me? Well, I do appreciate it. I just don't like the idea of starting a live stream and having it run for 5 minutes before I actually start doing the main presentation. So I used to do that, and now what I try to do nowadays is when I'm ready, I press the button, I do a quick sound check, which is my first minute where I'm trying to get things moving, and I might be saying, okay, respond to the poll, blah-de-blah-de-blah. I say hi, and then once I'm ready to go, we just rock straight into it. It usually takes about a minute to do that. I kind of prefer doing it that way. I think it's a better way to go about it. Anyway. Hello, Philippe. How are you? Is there a way to throw a two-handed axe? If not, how would handle this with house rules? So a two-handed axe is not a thrown weapon in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. So by law or rules intended, such as a great axe would be a two-handed axe, you could not do it. So to house rule it, I think what you'd probably have to do is you'd have to decide there's got to probably need to be some sort of strength requirement. I would say that you need to have a minimum strength score, whatever you decide that's going to be, okay? Maybe you decide that you have to have a minimum of strength of 15, a minimum strength score of 15 to be able to throw a great axe. And the great axe is not going to fly very far because it's not designed to fly very far. And maybe it only flies 10 feet. You can throw it 10 feet from you. And then anything beyond 10 feet, maybe if it's going beyond 10 feet, and it flies up to 20 feet before it falls to the ground. But from 10, beyond 10 feet to 20 feet, it's going to be disadvantaged. So you're looking at extreme range. I kind of would do it that way, Philippe, if you're wanting to have somebody throw a great axe. I know we always have somebody who looks at something and like, I want to do something that the rules doesn't cover. And you can always say, okay, it doesn't work. But if you want to make it work, then I would consider looking at some of the other things that are thrown. I think another thing to consider too is, you might even want to make the range increment even less than that, because the range for throwing a spear is not very far. You can't throw a spear that far either. Okay, so Fred's already mentioned about throwing two-handed weapons. I would personally put a short range improvised weapon when throwing something not made for it. Yeah. The improvised rolls would actually probably cover this pretty well. You could probably do that. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. What do you got here, Steve? I'm going to get through chat fairly quickly, and then I'm going to do some demonstration, because that's what I was hoping I'd be able to do. I allow players to throw. Players use their strength modifier to hit. A large thrown weapon have a limited range too. Two-handed axe would have a thrown range half of a one-handed thrown axe. So yeah, well, I guess that you could do that. I suppose you could say, okay, the one-handed throwing axe, half the distance of the throwing axe. You could do that. Yeah, that makes sense. Notice you don't have it for melee unless you get it. Yes, exactly. Also, too, if you're going to throw a two-handed axe, I wouldn't say you would add proficiency bonuses. I think you would just be using your strength modifier to throw that thing. Do you know what I mean? Because yeah, I don't think you can be proficient in throwing a two-handed axe. It's a little unusual. Although it's your game, you do what you want with it ultimately. When unsure, roll in favour of the PCs. Then if you got it wrong, you can just tell them before the next session. Yeah. Have a nice night, Fred. No. I'm not sure what that all means. Hello, Nacho Man. Nacho Man is also a patron. Thank you for being here. Your dirty Thanos meme had my my drink coming out of my nose. Okay. Okay. So to give you just a quick understanding of what's going on, I just don't have the brain width right now to present and learn enough different role-playing games or the equipment. I've got stuff that's coming, and so it will eventually start getting done. But I do have to write notes out so that I remember what to say. Because I'm in a live stream, it is very easy for me to make a mistake in a live stream, and for somebody to call me out about every single thing that I make a mistake in a live stream of all places, which is fair enough, yes, but it's a live stream, okay? And so I have to take a lot of care to make sure I get things right. So I'm taking a bit of a holiday, and I'm feeling very naughty right now, and so hence you get the Deadpool memes and the Thanos memes, and they probably will continue next week as well. So for those of you finding that you are suffering, or you've got too much drink pouring out your nose, be prepared for more. Anyway, I don't know if they'll be necessarily as good as these ones, but anyway, we'll see. Steve, Fred, I have some stuff to present to you. Okay. Deals with the rules changes introduced in Baldur's Gate 3. Oh God, here we go. Okay, Steve, fire away. I'm ready. You fire away your questions. So tomorrow, I normally do a live stream. Usually I start early, 10 a.m. in New Zealand, which is 2 hours earlier than my normal live streaming time. And tomorrow was intended to be remastering or upgrading the Rogue class for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. But instead, Chris Deus from Deus Ex Machina has asked me to talk about Baldur's Gate 3. And I said, I don't really know very much about Baldur's Gate 3 and I don't play video games, so how is this supposed to work? So that's what I'm doing tomorrow, okay? And so there will be no live stream tomorrow, but I will be talking with him about Baldur's Gate, and I will upload our discussion onto YouTube as soon as I possibly can. And he will probably be doing the same. So let's have a look. Fire away, Steve, with your questions about Baldur's Gate 3 and Dungeons and Dragons rules. I'm ready. I'm waiting. What do you got here, Fred? If you roll wrong in favour of the PCs, the gods were kind to you. Yeah. If you roll wrong against the PCs, we have to resurrect Kenny. Oh, I see. All right, this is the South Park reference. I always try to encourage players to attempt heroic acts. Okay. A heroic act, I absolutely think that's a great idea. I mean, that's how I would prefer to play my games. It doesn't always work that way, but, you know, it'd be good if it did. Do you have a rule of thumb when it comes to rounds? Yes. When it comes to a round, a round is 6 seconds, and I start at the top and I work my way to the bottom, and when I get to the bottom, I shift it over to round 2 after I finish round 1, and I start all over again. A rule of thumb. That's my rule of thumb. I start at the bottom of my order, and I work my way to the bottom, from the top to the bottom, and then I start again. There's your round. Oh, you mean in terms of taking turns? Oh, is that what you mean? Oh, I think I didn't quite understand what you're trying to say, Nacho. I try to have a round of combat take less than 1 minute per player total. That's my rule of thumb for a round. Oh, I see. I find longer than 4 rounds, then combat becomes boring, or might be my DM style. Yes, no, I agree. I found that most combat... So that's your question. What I find is most of my combats take between 1 and 3 rounds. If they take longer than that, either I have overcalculated the timing on the monster's hit points, or the players aren't doing a very good job, or I'm rolling really well and they are rolling like garbage. That's what I find. So anything beyond 4 or 5 rounds, I tend to find that's not really what Dungeons and Dragons is sort of designed around. It's designed more around, about 3 rounds as your max. But if you have a boss battle, it's nice if a boss battle is about 4 or 5 rounds. But it depends on how long it takes you to play that through. So, for example, I almost find that most of my climactic battles are actually very quick, but a lot happens in that time. So if I have a boss battle, I'd always like to aim for 4 or 5 rounds, but I find that usually my boss battles take between 1 and 2 rounds and everything is done, okay? But if I'm using like a legendary creature, I don't run legendary actions like 5e was designed for. At the end of every single person's turn, the monster, when they're a legendary creature, does something. So the bigger the group, the more actions the monster will perform. The smaller the group, the fewer legendary actions the monster performs. If I'm dealing with, and I usually don't like to put more than about 12 miniatures onto a table. I think a good number is about 6, but it also depends on how many people are in your group. Do you know what I mean? If you have a large group, then you probably have to have a few more threats so that you get your action economy in there properly. Another thing too is when it comes to rounds, I run my combats very differently. Even though I might place everybody into order, I don't run in an order like traditional initiative. So if I have the fighter, the rogue, and the wizard going before me, I will just tell them, tell me what you're going to do and roll your dice. And I don't stop and wait for one person to tell me what they're going to do and then roll the dice. I just say, okay, what are you going to do, fighter? Oh, I'm going to swing my sword. And I say, fine, roll your attack and your damage. Okay, what are you doing, wizard? And I'm going to cast firebolt. Cool, roll your attack and your damage. What are you going to do, rogue? I'm going to sneak around the back and backstab them and make a sneak attack. Okay, fine, make an attack, roll your damage. And then once I've got that all done, I go back and I say, okay, who's got some numbers for me? Because honestly, I don't think it really matters, because all three are kind of going together anyway. So I group initiative that way. What it means is a battle in Dungeons and Dragons 5e for me, if it's between 1 and 3 rounds, it's probably going to take about 2.5 minutes to 5 minutes maximum. If they're at low level, as we go up and it gets higher and higher in level, it takes longer and longer and longer because there's more attacks and there's more dice being rolled. And usually I get very angry with players if we're playing at high level beyond level 10 and they're not using a dice roller, like an automated dice roller, because it's a pain in the butt, frankly. I don't mind them so much rolling physically the attacks. If they have 5 attacks and they throw 5 d20s all at once, well done, thank you, do that. That's what I want. But when it comes to rolling damage, there's too much to calculate. Just use an automated system. High level play just slows it all down. So that's what I have to say about rounds. Okay. Let's keep going down here. A combat that drags on 3 game sessions is way out. A combat that drags on 3 game sessions is. I don't know how we got there. Of course, even 4e didn't drag on that long. 5e combat is way too long because people don't run 5e combat in a judicious manner. If you just do it the way that you've been told, the player's handbook, it will suck. Okay. Turns. Okay, turns, not rounds. Sorry, I have a head cold. No problems. So yes, I don't have a timer on my players, but what it does mean that is if I have somebody who takes their time and they're slow, they'll usually wind up telling me what they're doing near the end of the round, rather than at the beginning of the round. There are players at the table who I find, no matter what you do, will always be a bit slow, but because I run combat this way, it kind of makes up for their slowness in their decision-making process. Okay, Steve, you have a question. Baldur's Gate 3, which I'm not a huge fan of. I think I remember this from, was it yesterday, Steve? Allows players to drink potions as a bonus action. Yes, I've seen this. What are you? What's the question around this, Steve? Since in Dungeons and Dragons 5e, to drink a potion, okay, to drink a healing potion, it is an action, not a bonus action. And remember, a bonus action is not the same thing as an action. Your main action is different. Okay, so yes, that's happened. So what is it that you're asking about? Because I know Baldur's Gate has gone bonus action to drink a potion. So what is it that you're looking from me? No problem, Nacho. Look, you can ask me these questions some other time if you need to. You know I'm going to be back here doing this presentation stuff again. It'll happen. So if you can't get it to work today, it's always another day. Yeah? All right, Fred Hubber. You can't find the other Baldur's Gate 3 rules? Are you asking me, do I think... Are you asking me, do I think that Dungeons & Dragons 5e should turn drinking a healing potion into a bonus action? A lot of people have already house rolled this. I don't do this in my own table. None of the game masters in my home group have done this. None of us have agreed that we think drinking a potion of healing as a bonus action is a good idea. We decided that it was, characters are pretty easy at keeping alive in Dungeons and Dragons 5e, so we didn't think it was necessary. If you're sitting there drinking potions of healing, then maybe you've bitten off more than you should chew and you should have run away. Maybe you've made mistakes, maybe you were just unlucky, change your strategy. So I guess, yeah, since neither myself or any game master in my home group, and they're all game masters in my home group, have decided to use that house rule, we just keep drinking a potion to an action. I know it's not popular amongst people who play a character and have never done anything but play a character, but that's because they don't understand that it's too much. You know what I mean? And all of my group is made up of power gamers, so they're always looking for the next big toy, a better advantage. But there is a point where even power gamers and people playing characters realize that it's no fun if there's no real challenge, and this takes away the challenge rather a lot. I do understand that Baldur's Gate 3, the video game, is quite difficult at low level in terms of combat. Because probably the swinginess of a dice roll would probably be a part of that. Yeah. Okay. All right. What else we got here? It is one player's turn. They get to say what their PC does. The other players try not to interrupt unless asked about a rule. Okay. All right. So this is how you're just describing your stuff. Okay. You don't understand what you're trying to say? Look, Nacho, we'll get to it at some point for sure. So there are certain things in Dungeons and Dragons 5e that do make combat quite laborious, but again, I would say to you that it's about adjusting things so it will work for you. And it also comes down to your players. If you have players who are good at making decisions and don't suffer from paralysis, you'll be good. I've got experienced players, and so they know what they're doing. They make decisions quickly. But if they were new players, they might struggle. So if you're dealing with new people, they're going to take a lot longer. That's just how it is. You get to know, it doesn't matter what system you're dealing with then, if they're dealing with new people. Fred Hubber, I like your adjust legendary actions by party size. Yes, I found it to be one of the easiest ways to solve the problem of the solo monster. If you want to solve the problem of the solo monster or legendary monsters just getting cakewalked, this is the solution. Even if your battle takes one round, the chances are they've been able to do 5 or 6 different things during that one round before they died. Or before the characters had decided they had to run away. It's quite hard for me to get my players to run away nowadays. Even if I tax things a bit harder, they're pretty good at dealing with stuff. Not sure how I feel, but I sometimes fudge my rolls if I feel combat is going on too long and I can see my players getting bored. So Nacho, you're not the only one to do this. When things get boring and really frustrating in a game, suddenly those last 20 hit points the monster had, they just don't exist. It doesn't matter. Look, I don't fudge my rolls anymore, but that's because I made a decision that I didn't care about whether the players killed something or got killed themselves, So I don't get too worried about monsters dying because there's always more monsters. I don't get worried about player characters dying because there's always another alternative. They can either roll up a new character or play the same character and bring it back into play. I couldn't give a toss about any of that sort of stuff. So fudging rolls is like a personal choice, and everybody has their own different reason for whether they fudge dice or don't fudge dice. And if it's boring for you and it's boring for the players, just move it on. If it's a foregone conclusion, why keep going? Do you know what I mean? I totally get it. So I wouldn't worry about that. You don't have to feel bad about it at all. I'm not here to tell you that fudging dice is like it's a crime against humanity. It's not. What do you got here, Fred? My creatures might suddenly have less hit points if it's dragging because I probably gave them too much. Yeah, I mean, sometimes, look, I max out my monsters' hit points all the time. Sometimes that seems like a bad idea, sometimes it doesn't. So, what do you got here, Steve? Why not allow the average instead of an auto dice roller? Now, somebody did actually... Now, Steve, it's a very good question. Somebody did actually approach me, and I think I was quite young and new to 5e, and I was doing this. So what I do myself is I run the monsters, and I don't roll for damage. The only time I will roll for damage for a monster is when it's a critical hit. Then I will roll the dice. Otherwise, I use the average damage, and I add a 6-sided dice to that average damage when they make any kind of attack. So if they have 3 attacks, I would add the average damage plus 3 of these, right? If they've only got 1 attack, it'll only be 1 six-sided dice added to the average damage. Now, the reason because is why my players got access to a lot of very powerful classes and subclasses. They're very experienced, and monsters in 5e don't really do enough damage. But if you're new, it would be too much. But my group needs that, and I probably should pump the dice up a little bit more, maybe even to a D8 rather than a D6. I've been doing this for a while, okay? Now, in terms of a player doing that, I had somebody approach me and say, can I use average damage rather than rolling dice for my damage? And I said no. But I'm going to say right now, I actually think it's not a bad idea. It actually, if anything, it kind of works in terms of speed, particularly at high level. If you're just taking average damage, the problem I find is I've only ever had one player ever ask me, can I take the average damage from my dice roll rather than roll the dice? And out of the hundreds of people who have played with me, only one person ever asked me that question. But if I had somebody ask me that question again and it would help speed up combat, I'd probably say yes. Or I'd say just get a dice roller. Just get a dice roller and let it dice roll for you. It does all the calculations. This is why I'm not against people using phones and having a dice roller on their phone when they're playing a game, because it helps me out, speeds things up. I like that idea. Does that make sense, Steve? Okay. I've also assigned creatures takes 4 times being hit and it goes down, no HP number. All right, so you have like so you put it on a timer basically, Fred. 4 hits, it goes down. Interesting. Fred, just wanted to say I am appreciative of your time. Thanks for doing these live streams. Can't make all of them, but I try. No, you don't have to make all of them. So the idea is I create live streams on this channel to cover all the topics people might want to ask me, right? And to cover as much of the hobby as possible. And now that I can finally talk about something other than Dungeons and Dragons, so it's nice to be able to talk about Morkbork and Shadow Dark and Star Wars Saga. I like the idea of being able to expand it. So yeah, but it doesn't mean that everybody shows up for everything. I would never expect that, because not everything's designed for everybody. My subscriber base is very broad, so yeah, it's all good, Steve. I am against allowing players unless they have already tried it as a bonus action. Okay. So, Steve, you're talking about the drinking a healing potion, right? Yeah. So, look, if you don't think that drinking a potion should be a bonus action, don't shift it to a bonus action. Keep it as an action. You use an action to drink your potion. If you want to make an attack, you have to make a choice. You make an attack or you drink a potion. Simple as that. No, I can see I'm catching up, though, I think. I'm almost there. Here's my rules on potions, Steve. Okay. Potions are, for the most part, fragile and have to be stored carefully. So unless the player has readied a potion the round before, they can't drink that bad boy as a bonus action. So you could have a bandolier or a belt with a potion on the side, so it's easily accessible. I know some players go out of their way to make sure that's taking place. Group initiative. You are confused by group initiative? You ever use GI in your games? Yes, I use group initiative all the time. All the time. Hello, Pale Rider. Bonus actions are bollocks. Yes, I am not a fan of the bonus action. I think bonus actions are bollocks. They may, in fact, have hairy balls, for all you know. I don't like them. I think that they actually take away from what I prefer is a 2-action economy. You move, you do something. You move, you do something. And that's all I want. But the other big problem I have with bonus actions is people get the idea of a bonus action confused with the main action, because the wording is too similar. When you say you have an action, spend your action. Then you say you have a bonus action. People associate a bonus action in Dungeons and Dragons 5e incorrectly. I'll say this incorrectly. They associate a bonus action as I can do whatever I did with my main action all over again. And that's not how Dungeons and Dragons 5e is designed. And I preferred when they used the minor action or the swift action. If you're going to have a different differentiation of that, the word bonus action was a stupid idea. It needed to be minor action or swift action, or maybe in this case bullshit action. I don't know. Yeah. So I can demonstrate group initiative to you on the grid in a second. Actually, if you want to see it, Steve, I can see the bottom of the chat, so I might do that so that you can see. I will roll up initiative like you would normally do, and then I would show you how I actually implement it. Yep. Hello, Caleb. How are you? Caleb X is here. So, Pale Rider. If you have a healing potion in a skin and it was stuck to your body with a needle, I'd allow a bonus action to smack the healing wine skin. Okay, nice. What do you got here, Steve? 6-sided dice to the average is what I do as well. Yeah, a lot of people do. And actually, I got this from Chris Perkins. Chris Perkins was the first person to suggest this idea, and this is what I do, is he takes the average damage of a monster and adds a 6-sided dice to it every time. Because they don't quite do enough damage. Sometimes it's not enough. Even 6-sided dice adding is just not enough. I'm glad you like my channel, Caleb. Good news. In my campaign setting, I am putting in rules for making high-level combat go fast. Yeah, if you want to make combat go fast in your campaign, get them to get dice rollers. Dice rollers are your friend. They really are. Yeah, I'll demonstrate group initiative. We've got plenty of time today. I'll demonstrate it. I might go and have a poo first, or at least a toilet break. Come back and do it. I think that's fine, and I will demonstrate everything else today. I think we can do that. The numbers are designed for the PCs to succeed more often than fail, so go average tends to be an auto success. Yeah. Anyway, average death save roll is 10.5, 10 to succeed. Auto success by using average. I'm not talking about the average on an attack roll. I'm only talking about a damage roll. Okay? I'm not talking about the attack roll. I still want them to make the attack rolls. Yeah. Whether they use an automatic dice roller or they use a real dice, I don't care. If a character used a bandolier for potions, I'd have a chance either every time they were hit that 1 to 3 were destroyed. Well, you could do that, Pale Rider. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. Yeah. I mean, it really depends on how you want the game to sort of function, really, and what your players will put up with. There's another thing to consider. In any case, I'm going to take a quick break, but just to give you an idea, we'll be coming back to this next time. So I will keep the chat up on my phone so I can see what's going on. But what I will be doing is I will most certainly be demonstrating, and I'll try to keep an eye on chat as I'm going so you can ask questions. So I'm going to put into chat here now, hashtag ask your questions. But I will be doing demonstration, and we'll do group initiative, and I'll do all the other things. I should be able to buzz through that in about half an hour, I think. Okay, all right, so Arnold will look after you for 5 minutes or less, and I'll be back, and then we'll get on to doing some demos. coming back into the fray. All right. Almost ready, people. Just getting into position. Okay, there we go. I think that'll... we'll just move them a little bit closer, that'll do. Alright. Right, switching back over. I'm mostly ready. Okay, so quick look at chat, and I will then keep an eye on the chat from my phone. Hopefully it keeps updating. I'd be even worse for the Bandoliers potions. AD&D potion. Oh no, I don't. Exploding potions sounds like too much fun. Fire breathing breaking. Yeah, bad stuff. Bad stuff. Okay, let's do some demonstration. That's why you're here in the first place. I said I would demonstrate. Let's do some demonstration. Straight back over to the pad. So starting off, let's deal with something like initiative. For those of you who are like, oh, what's the deal? Okay, here it is. So with Dungeons and Dragons 5e initiative, what we have is the orcs come out of the bushes and roar, swinging their axes above their head and charge toward you. Okay, yelling something in Orcish, probably something like, take their scalps. I mean, who knows what it is, whatever it is. But then we have to roll initiative because the game master says, okay, there's going to be a fight, roll initiative. So what does it look like? Very, very simple. We have our wizard has a modifier of 2, and we're going to roll a 20-sided dice. So we roll a 20-sided dice. We take that number 2 and 19. 2 and 19 comes to, if I can get my little hand in here, that's 21. All right, so that's our first number. Next, we have our rogue. They have a 3 for their modifier for initiative. So then we roll our 20-sided dice, and we get a 10 and a 3. So 10 and 3. It's 13. Next, we get a -1. -1. So we're going to go with the red dice. That's a minus, that one is. -1, because the fighter's got a minus to their dex modifier. So that's why that's happening. So then we roll a 20-sided dice. Get a 7. -1. We get a 6 in total. Not very much. Never mind. And the cleric, same problem. But I got an 18, which is a little bit better. 18. And that is going to come out as a 17. Sorry if you can't... Oh, I can't quite see that. I'm reaching around a microphone, people, so it's part of the problem. Let's do that. That's 18. And we get 17. Okay, all right. And then the DM, the orcs, they actually have a positive 1 to their dex. So going to be a little bit different for them. Roll for their dice. I got a 6. And that's 6. And so they get 7. So I take all those numbers, and from the highest to the lowest, I put them into order. So the wizard has got 21 at the highest number. The next highest number is actually the cleric, surprisingly. So we'll move them up, put them into the right position. And and then we'll take our next number, which I believe is a 13, which is the rogue. So we'll get a rogue into position. And then the next number after that is our DM. So I'll put out DM 7. Unfortunately, our fighter rolled really, really kind of garbage. So they're going to be going last. Sorry, buddy. Okay, so as long as there's no surprise involved and both parties know that each other is there, we're now ready to go. Okay, so this is what you would normally do when you're running Dungeons and Dragons 5e. And this is why it takes so long to get through a battle. Somebody says, okay, wizard, it's your turn. Take your turn on the first round. So then you go through the process of them deciding what they're going to do, rolling some dice, casting a spell, making some damage rolls if they hit or succeed with their spell, whatever the heck it is. And then we go down and do the cleric. Okay, and then they make a decision and we wait for them as they roll dice and then roll damage and so forth. And then we do the same thing with the rogue, who then moves into position, does their thing, makes their attack roll, and like it goes on like this. Then you get to the game master, and oh my god, the game master's got like a whole bunch of miniatures. Now if you're smart as a game master, what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that you have a bunch of 20-sided dice. So because I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 orcs, what I would generally do, unless if they're all pretty much the same, is I would just roll a bunch of dice, like 8 dice all at once. Because this is a spellcaster, maybe I don't do that. I roll 7 of them, and then I just go average damage. What's the average damage on an orc? Well, an average damage for the orc with their great axe is a 9. So I'm going to add that to, that's the damage they do. That's usually how I do it if I was running it straight as rules written. Then, of course, you cast a spell with this orc shaman at the back, and it's now finally the fighter's turn, who then has to decide what they're going to do. They move, they make an attack, they damage roll again, and then we start over the same process all over again. Okay, so that's how you normally go through it. Now, if I was doing this my way, okay, this is group initiative. This is not how Dungeons & Dragons 5e run, okay? This is how Fred does it, because Fred likes combat, but gets pissed off with how long it takes. So this is what I do. There's no surprise round in this situation. Great. Wonderful. That means the wizard, the cleric, and the rogue get to go. I say, wizard, cleric, rogue, your turn, whatever the character names are. Decide what you're going to do. Wizard says, I'm going to cast a spell. Fine. Cast a spell, roll your dice. What are you doing, cleric? And I just go through. I don't wait for them to roll their dice. I just ask them what they're going to do. They decide, they roll. The cleric decides what they're going to do. They say they're going to move and make an attack. Great. They do that. I say, roll your dice, okay? And I move on to the next person. Frankly, as long as those 3 people there, these 3 here, go first, okay? Then I just collect up all their numbers once they've done all their dice rolling. That way I'm not waiting for people. I just have to get people, whoever, I don't care if the rogue decides to act before the wizard, because the wizard's still thinking, you know? Because it ultimately in the end, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter that much. I know there are abilities in the game that are very much tied to how, who takes their turn and how long your turn will take and all that sort of stuff. But honestly, in the end, who gives a fuck? If the wizard wants to cast Fireball first, great, now they can, you know? So I do that. Once they've taken their turn and I've noted down all the numbers that they've done, it's now my turn. I take my turn, I roll multiple 20-sided dice, because I'm not going to roll one at a time. That's not happening. I'm just rolling one dice. I know what my number is that I have to add to the 20-sided dice roll that I'm making, and there's a whole bunch of attacks, mate. And of course, I know my modifier is going to be a 5, so I'm just looking for anything that hits, basically, and I'll be calling out some numbers to them very quickly, and then I'm rolling my damage, because I'm just adding one single dice to the damage output. If something actually hits, I don't worry about rolling dice if they don't hit, because quite often monsters don't. So my turn's usually done very quickly. Yep. Then I get to the fight. The fighter's already figured out what they're going to do. They do their thing, they move, they take their action, and we are finished, and we move on. And honestly, I find that most combats take me, if I'm doing theatre of the mind and I'm not using a battle grid, it'll take me between 2.5 minutes to 5 minutes. I always get people to roll initiative before we start the session, and I use the same initiative score for them for the entire session. So if we have 3 battles, I'm using the same initiative roll. I don't get them to roll initiative all over again. The only time I might change initiative, okay, is if they rolled really bad and it's like the main battle, or I will re-roll where the game master goes. If the monster's a different type of monster and it had a different modifier, I will re-roll that. So all I need to do is shift me rather than wait for all the numbers coming through from initiative. One of the worst things I've found is when you get people to roll initiative, it always takes way too long to get it done. If you're playing on a virtual tabletop, you can kind of speed that up, but there's no guarantee. So that's how I run group initiative. Now, if the game master was last and all the players were going first, then I would just say, okay, you guys are all going first, decide who's going to do what, and start rolling dice. That's how I do it. And then I just have to worry about myself at the very end. Sweet ass. Okay? If my monsters are going first and the players are going last, well, it's nice and simple. I'll take my turn, and then after that, whoever pipes in and says they're going to do something, they get to go first. And then once we've had everybody take their turn, then we move on to our next round. Voila, we are finished. We got to the bottom, we move back up, second round, done. So that's how group initiative works. So let me just have a quick look at chat while you guys are probably wondering what the heck's going on here. But anyway, I always thought the round segments turns rules were good. Yeah, not so much. Yeah, it's all right. The segments time it took to do stuff. Wizards with last initiative casts. It adds to going off 3 rounds later. Just not good overall. Yeah, look, there are better ways. Look, if I was doing this with 10 players, there's no way I'd be rolling initiative. I would roll initiative for 10 players. No. We're going around in a anti-clockwise or clockwise. And honestly, usually I just have the names and I just tick off if they've had their turn. So I usually have this, like on a piece of paper quite often rather than this battleground, this battle pad. I'll just tick off, they've had their turn for the round 1. Cool. When everybody's had their turn, I move on. Okay, it's done. I rocked that system. It had memorized. Okay, all right. Yeah. So the decision making is what usually burns up a lot of time rather than the dice rolling, I've found. But also too, my players are educated, so when they make an attack, right? When they decide they're going to make an attack, they also roll damage. So if my fighter is going to attack the orc, I always insist you must roll attack and damage dice at the same time. If the damage dice aren't going to get used because your attack did not hit, who cares? But it's done. Okay, rather than waiting for you to pick up the dice and roll it and so forth. This is the norm. I mean, people have been saying this forever. Like rolling attack and damage at the same time just to speed up the process. And then it's just down to you calculating stuff and using your brain. But if you're playing late at night, this is why I think people should use automatic dice rollers more, is because you don't have to worry about doing the maths. It does it for you, Okay. I've used timers before, but again, I don't want to wait 1 minute for every person to take their turn. It's too long, so I don't do that. I tried using a 30-second timer and a 1 minute timer, and yeah, never liked it. So I replaced it with this. I put D4 usually beside each NPC creature to dice color code them, then roll all the D20s at once and all of the damage dice, one big handful. Yes, that's another thing, is color coordinated dice really help to speed things up. You can do that as a player and as a game master. Yeah, mass combat. Yeah, it's always better to avoid mass combat if you can. A D12 is not good choice for making a creature. What? Choice for marking a creature. Not used a lot. Right. Okay. So let me get on to a different role. Let's move on, because that's initiative. I've covered how initiative is run in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. I've explained how I do it in my games. I'm going to put some water in my mouth, and then I'm going to go through some of these rules. Since apparently that's why you're here, right? Is let's go through some of the basics. So I'm going to move some of the stuff out of the way just to make it a little bit easier for myself. And I'm going to go backwards. I could go forwards, but I thought I would go backwards instead. That's just really confusing, isn't it? Oh dear. And probably to mark this too, because I know apparently YouTube likes it when I do this sort of thing. So I'll do it. Maybe it'll help you as well. Use an object. Use an object. Here we go. Let's do this. Speedy Gonzalez, something like that. Okay. There it is. Is that what I want? No, let's get this board out of the way. It's just going to get in the way for me. Right. That's easier. I'll put it over there. All right, so you can see what's going on. All right, so use an object. Very simple. When you use an object in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, you decide what you want to do. So if you've already used your interaction and you've tried to do something very small, then you used your main action, your action, to actually use an object. So using an object, the wizard here might decide to pick up a rock. They've already picked up one rock using their interaction, and they want to pick up another rock. It's still a very minor action that they're trying to do, but that second rock in their turn now requires them to use their action, and it's a use an object action. Maybe you decide, okay, I'm going to move over here to this boulder here, okay, and I want to push the boulder. I want to push the boulder. Now it's use an object. Why is it use an object? Why does it require your entire action to do so rather than an interaction? Because it's going to require more time and more effort on your part. So it's going to mean you won't be able to make an attack. Instead, you'll just push in the rock. Okay? Very, very simple. That's how use an object works. The entire purpose of use an object is to stop people trying to do too much in the same round. If you have people doing too many things in the same round, it slows the game down, and you wind up with people stacking on more and more things they want to do, and you never get past that first round. So it's all about trying to balance out the economy of action in your game. Okay? All right, so that's that one. So use an object. And generally when it comes to use an object, you're only going to be using this action as a use an object if you've already used your interaction or the task requires too much effort to actually perform it. All right, next, search. Search is one of the worst actions in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. Okay, when it comes to combat, it is often completely ignored for a variety of different reasons, usually as a result of the fact that game masters don't know how to deal with it. So they, and players also don't know how to deal with invisible creatures. The biggest issue is always invisible creatures with search, okay? So how does search work? In Dungeons and Dragons 5e, the search action is your main action. Now, whether your creature, your monsters, your characters doing it, it doesn't really matter. So to do so, you have to make a wisdom or perception check, or you could make an intelligence investigation check, and you're going to roll a 20-sided dice, okay? You roll your 20-sided dice, you add whatever modifier you have to that, and then that number there is then compared with whoever's hiding. So, for example, if you have orcs hiding behind a rock, and somebody wants to actually spot them, okay, and they have hidden themselves, or they are hard to notice, okay, we're doing that in this case. The problem with this, I've always found, is that if you are able to discover that there is somebody there by searching during your turn, but you have to use your main action to do so, you can't attack them. You could call out and say, there is an orc behind those rocks, but you can't do anything about that. You can only describe to the other players roughly where they are. Okay, now the dwarf can, if they want, and can get there, can try to walk over there to get to that orc if they want to. Yep. And then make an attack. But it won't benefit you so much. The reason being is that once you have discovered where somebody is, when you're searching in combat, is they will change position. This is quite common. This happens with goblins all the time. So, okay, I've moved to here, I've done a search, I know roughly, I can see the orc on the other side of the rocks, or I can hear them back there maybe, or I can smell them because they haven't been bathing. And so next turn I'll get to move there. But if they take their turn and they've already moved position, they come out from behind the rocks and start to engage the cleric with their great axe, my search action is kind of a waste of time. It's one of the biggest problems with the search action. I'm not a huge fan of the search action, if you hadn't figured it out. Hello, Derp. How are you? Derp is also a patron. Thank you for being here. Okay, let's do the help action. Now, the help action is quite interesting. It's got a lot of different purposes. It can be used inside of combat and outside of combat. But it works a very particular way. So I'll just change this up, since again, that'll just make it clear that we are dealing with the help action. Help. Okay, the help action. Did I get it there? Yeah, all right, there we go. It's there. Cool, cool. So, help action requires you use your main action, and your character can do this, your monsters can do this, and you're trying to aid one of your allies in completing a task or in some sort of attack. The most common one in battle is going to be, I want to make an attack roll and I want to help somebody else, okay? So first of all, maybe you decide, okay, what I would really like to do is I want to get into a position where I can help the fighter attack this orc. So during my turn, I move over here, okay, and I'm trying to engage this orc. I don't have to make any, I don't do anything. I don't need to make an attack. I don't do anything other than that. I give up my action so that they get advantage. So instead of the fighter rolling one 20-sided dice when they make their attack roll, they're going to be rolling two 20-sided dice, and they're going to add their bonus for their attack roll. And so you just roll those dice and you take the highest result. You get advantage. So the help action in battle is advantage. I got a 20 plus my 5. It's a critical hit. Voila. I get to do a whole bunch of damage with my axe now. That's how the help action works in combat when you're making an attack roll. But the help action, when it's used as an ability check or a skill check, is a different kettle of fish. You're not making an attack roll now. It's going to get down to something else. Say you decide, what I want to try to do is I want to try to move one of these rocks. That's what you're trying to do. Or maybe you're trying to get on top of the rock. So the wizard decides, since the rogue is trying to get on top of the rock, they'll move over there. 1, 2, 3, 4. They get over there. They're close enough to help them up onto the rock so they can climb on top. They give up their action to do so in the middle of battle. And that means instead of making your athletics check or your climbing check or your strength check to get onto that rock, okay, instead of rolling one 20-sided dice, you're going to be rolling two 20-sided dice. You get advantage. And then you add your strength modifier, okay, to that, or your athletics modifier to that. And so that's what you would get. So you roll your dice, you get whatever the result is. I got a 6 and a 3, so I get rid of the 3, that's this lower number, and I keep the 6, and I add it to my 1. And that's what our check would be. So that's how advantage and the help action is used in the game in terms of a battle. Ability checks, skill checks, and then the attack roll. Okay, so next, let's do, what's the next one on my list here? Let's do the dodge action. The dodge action, which probably doesn't get used nearly enough as it is, but let's do the dodge action. Dodge. There we go. And shuffle this over here. Pardon me, people. So you know what we're talking about. We're doing the dodge action. Now the dodge action is exactly what it sounds like. We're doing a matrix style dodge, right? So the dodge action requires you use your main action. You can't use a bonus action usually unless you have a special feature using your main action to do so. And so a good example of the dodge action is, what happens if I'm suddenly surrounded by way too many orcs and the fight is looking rough. There's just too many engaging. They don't want to have too many attacks leveled at them all at once. And they decide the best course of action is to let those at the back do all the work and dodge. So, very, very simple. You use your main action as your character. Your fighter takes the dodge action, and it makes it more difficult to be hit by an attack. So all of the enemies with their great axes, these orcs, now instead of them rolling one 20-sided dice for their attack and then adding a 5 for their modifier, okay, no, they have to roll two 20-sided dice, and they take the lowest result from that dice roll. And in this case, I got a 5, I got an 18. Well, no, the 18 doesn't get used because it's disadvantaged, because guess what? Our fighter is dodging, and they get to dodge for the entire round. It lasts until the beginning of their next turn, okay, the entire round. It also means that if we have a spellcaster casting a spell, it would grant advantage on any dexterity saving throw. Okay, so Suddenly you decide, oh, we've got to worry about dodging because there is a fireball going down, because yes, the orc shaman apparently can cast fireball, and you're in the blast area, all right? Well, okay, great, no problems. I make my dexterity saving throw, but I get to have it at advantage. Instead of rolling one 20-sided dice and adding my modifier, I'm now rolling 2, and I get to keep the higher result of those 2 dice. I get the 18 and the 3, so forget about the 3. I get advantage for this. Because I'm dodging, I get the 18 instead. And add my modifier for my dexterity saving throw. In this case, it's probably a -1 for this character. It might be higher, you never know. And I will hopefully succeed rather than fail. So that's the dodge action. Okay, drink of water, and I'll move on to the next one. We are almost there? Not quite. All right, dodge action. Done. Disengage will be next. Disengage. I can see you guys' comments there. All right. So here is disengage. Disengage. Moving that up, and we're in the right place. Okay, there's our disengage. Okay, so let's get rid of this because the disengage doesn't require any dice rolling whatsoever. Disengage, as it sounds, requires you use your main action, okay, in conjunction with your movement. So when you move, you're going to be disengaging at the same time, but you have to burn up your action. Okay, so you declare that you are disengaging, and then you move. And when you do so, you don't provoke an attack of opportunity. So when you leave the threatened space of a monster or an enemy, you don't need to worry about them making a basic attack against you, and you can just move. So what you can do here is the fighter can decide to disengage as the action and move back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they're now out of the way. Got out of combat. There's another way you can use disengage too, if you really wanted to, and that is to get round a front line. So you're the fighter, but no, what I really want to do is I want to get closer to the spellcaster, because if I can get to the spellcaster, I can change the way things work for me. And I might not have enough space to do that, but it might work really well if I can get there. So I decide, okay, instead my choice is I'm going to disengage and move. So I use my action to disengage. I then move, and I go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Now I don't quite get to the shaman, but I'm pretty close. So you can actually get around the front line and go after, say, the wizard or the big bad monster or the baddie, and get closer to them so you can make attacks against them. That doesn't change the fact that maybe the shaman will move further back, or your wizard will move further back, and you won't get to them on the second round, but I can at least do that. Yep. So there's a good reason to have the disengage action, because moving all the way around there did not provoke any attacks of opportunity. So there's 2 different reasons to use disengage quite often. Nice one. All right, let's do dash. Dash is dash is when you really need to get moving, don't you? We'll do dash. Dash. All right, so dash has got a different reason to be used, and I will reset this, jiggy this a little bit, because it's probably not going to work the way I want it. So I'm going to move all this stuff out of the way, give you a better idea of what's going on. Okay, all right. There we go. We've got a bunch of orcs on the road, and our fighter's way over here, and the rest of our characters are behind. Something like this, I guess. Roughly like that. So, dash. The reason for using dash is very particular. Can I get to my enemy and make an attack? Do I want to get up close and in their face? Dash is either about running away or getting up close. It's about maneuvering around the battlefield quickly. Yep. So to dash, it requires your main action, and you get to move your character or your creature, your monster, their speed again. It's not extra movement, you just get to move again. So if my fighter has got a speed of 30 feet, I can use my move to go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, but I didn't get all the way there, and I want to be just right up in their face so that I can start engaging in a fight. So now I'm going to use my dash as my action. Instead of making an attack, I'm not going to throw a javelin, I'm just going to make an attack. So I move again using my action, and I dash 5, 10, 15, 20, and I'm now right in the fray of things. So I get across the battlefield as quickly as possible. The other choice is you use dash when you decide, heck, I don't want to be here anymore, and I want to get out, I want to bug out. There are too many orcs, and I want to leave. So if you are quite close to them, but not going to provoke an attack of opportunity, you might even do this and provoke an attack of opportunity, you can. You might decide, okay, at the beginning of my turn, I'm going to move 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. I want to keep going. I'm going to dash. I'll use my action and move again. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and I'm just bugging out. Leave everybody else to die. You can even do this if you're up close, but you will, your first attack, the first time you leave, you're going to have one of those orcs making an attack of opportunity against you. Not necessarily something that you want to have happen, particularly if it will down your character. But that is the dash action, okay? All right, there are a bunch of other things, attacks and casting spells and so forth. How much time have I got left? We'll see. I might just jump over to chat before I start doing this. I'm quite happy to demonstrate some attack rolls and some spell casting if people want. But I'm also aware that I'm running out of steam. And it might be nice to just stop for today, but we'll see how we go. Anyway, let's have a look. Are there some questions around mounted combat? Oh God, please tell me there isn't. No, maybe there isn't. Maybe there isn't some questions around that. That'd be nice. Okay. I've done 3.5 campaign with 9 players. I had to be a dictator about people taking their turns, being quiet on other people's turns. I've had 13 people at my table at one time, and it's not something you want to skite about. It's proof of the pudding that you're insane. I can assure you, me agreeing to having 13 people at the table was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Never doing it again. Never doing it again. But it's just hard sometimes when you're running games in public stores to say no. 2-minute time at the beginning of the round. They can discuss then, and they must turn. Yeah, so you use a timer of 2 minutes. Okay. Yes, it's look. It often winds up being almost a waste of time. How much can you search in 6 seconds is only part of the problem. It often just doesn't work out. Hello, Dirt. What do you got here? Will you be doing going into mounted combat, or is that not basic enough for this episode? Do you want me to cover mounted combat? Mounted combat in Dungeons and Dragons 5e is designed to be really, really simple, but it's also a complete pain in the butt because people always assume far too much. So mounted combat players get mad at me targeting the mounts. They have easy AC and lower HP. Yep. Tumble the mount and the rider goes falling, flying, damage, prone. Yes, I get it. I totally understand. Yep. If you discovered a hiding figure or figures, could you give a hold signal and wait to get your full action back to attack? Yeah, okay, all right. Are people really wanting me to cover mounted combat today? Is that what it looks like? That might be the case. All right, okay. I don't like covering mounted combat for a variety of different reasons. Do I have a horse close by that I can demonstrate with? I suppose I have. I suppose I could. I suppose I could. I've had 14 players, but only one session. Yeah, it's not a good feeling. 14, 13. No, it's not fun at all. And does the mount fall on the rider and trap them? Ah, dear. If you discover a hiding figure or figures, could you have a... Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what you're trying to say there, Pale Rider. I don't think it's going to work out the way people think it's going to work out. Yeah? Trapped in a horse. Yeah, well, you don't have to necessarily duplicate something from True Grit or Lord of the Rings. No, there really isn't. Combat tactic hand signals aren't really a Dungeons and Dragons 5e thing. It'll be a house rule thing. So disengage keeps your hand free. Okay, so all right. Okay, I'll grab a horse. I'll grab a horse and we'll do my mounted combat. I don't like doing mounted combat in videos for some very obvious reasons, but since it's come out, let's deal with the monster, I guess. Because I know what's going to happen. Every time I've done mounted combat, somebody said, that's not how mounted combat works, Fred. You don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, oh, God, here we go. Here we go. Mounted combat. So, there we are. This is mounted combat. I will rearrange my battlefield a little bit, and then we'll grab a horse. I've got a horse pretty close by. I think I can grab, so we'll do that, and then we'll put our fighter on a horse so you can see what that's going to look like. Okay, all right. Where's my horse? Give me a sec. Yeah, there we go. It's a horse, of course. It's two horses, rather one horse. Have one over here. Okay. Alright, David's horse will do. Alright, there we go. Alright, so pardon me, but this horse does not have a big enough base for me to stick the rider on top of the horse. I'm not going to do that. And yeah. But just assume that your rider is on a horse. Now there is a problem. A lot of people get confused with the difference between a riding horse and a war horse. This is probably the biggest problem I've ever come across, is people assume that all horses behave the same way. And they don't, because they aren't trained the same. So you've got to get past that first. If you accept that a riding horse is not capable of fighting in combat, you're probably on the right track. If you will not accept that a riding horse is inappropriate for sticking on a battlefield, you are going to have a lot of problems. So first off, when it comes to mounted combat, once during your move you can mount a creature that is within 5 feet. So as long as you're within 5 feet, you can get on there. Okay, you're going to be using up some of your action to do so. So doing so, okay, the amount of movement that you use to get onto your horse is half your speed. So it's going to cast half your movement. So if you have a speed of 30 feet, then 15 feet is getting used to get on the horse. If you're right next to it, you're getting on. Okay, if you're not right next to it, you need to be not too far away to be able to get on there. So I'm moving here, that's 5 feet. Okay, then another 15 feet of my 30 is getting onto the horse. Right, so that's the first thing to understand. Next, getting off the horse. All right, getting off the horse, not quite so bad. It doesn't really come up that much. But when it comes to actually fighting, there's a section on page 198. While you are mounted, you have two options, and this is where people get stuck. You can either control a mount or allow it to act independently. And people assume that this will apply to all horses, and it really doesn't. Okay, it will really only make sense if you have a war horse. If you only have a riding horse, you know what your riding horse is going to do? As soon as you try to go into battle, it is going to turn around, throw you off, and run away. That's what it's going to do. Now, it doesn't say that in the rules, but you've got to understand the rules for controlling a mount and fighting on a horse is designed for an animal designed for war and for fighting. That's a war horse, not a riding horse. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. Okay, all right. So intelligent creatures such as dragons act independently. So if you're riding on a dragon, of course, then you won't be worrying about whether they're going to be acting independently or whether you control them, because dragons always just do whatever the heck they want to. That's how it works. That's what it's suggesting here. Okay, all right, so we've got that bit. You can control a mount only if it has been trained to accept the rider. Now, the first thing people see when they say this is they're like, oh, okay, you can control a mount. That means I can choose to control it or have it act independently if it has been trained to accept a rider. That doesn't mean that if it's going to accept you as just a riding horse accepting you so you can ride around, okay, is not the same as riding into a battle, okay? Domesticated horses, donkeys, and similar creatures are assumed to have such training. So the first thing they're saying here, right, I was like, okay, a domesticated horse, a donkey, and similar creatures are assumed to have such training. That is that they allow you to get onto a horse and to ride it around. Yep. And this is where the whole problem with these rules work. By that one sentence there, that sort of suggests in a player's mind, okay, well, that means that I can actually take a riding horse into a battle. Because, look, it just said it, Fred. Look, domesticated horses, donkeys, and similar creatures which have never been trained for battle can ride around and be controlled in a battlefield environment. It says it there, Fred, in that sentence. And I've had this happen to me so many times, and it makes no sense whatsoever. Okay? If you want to run your game that way, and you're the game master, great. If you're a player playing in a game with some other game master who's running their game the way that they think makes sense, just let them run the game the way they think it makes sense, okay? And go buy yourself a war horse and stop getting a riding horse. The initiative of a controlled mount changes to match yours when you mount it. So when you get on here, that means that the mount goes on your initiative. So if you've got an initiative of 6, okay, then the horse is acting at the same time as you. It moves as you direct it. Okay, so you can actually maneuver and operate a riding horse and a war horse in a battle on the field for sure. You can move it around, no problems. It says it here. And it has only 3 other actions it can take. So it can dash. So it's got an action. Your horse can move around back and forth over here and so forth. It can move around. It can do stuff. But it can also dash. So if you wanted to run up, have it move 50 feet, because a riding horse moves pretty fast, and then dash as an action, it can. But you can also take the disengage action. So you could move and be taking the disengage action, and you could ride around all of these orcs and try to get round the back. Maybe even go round the trees if you dash rather than disengage. But it can also take the dodge action. So quite often what we wind up with people doing is like, okay, I take my riding horse, I'm going to ride into battle. Dun, 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 and I'm going to be swinging and attacking the orcs, and I'm going to have it dodge, because it says one of the 3 things I can do is I can dodge with my controlled mount. A controlled mount can move and act even on the turn that you mounted it. So even if I mounted it, it still gets its complete movement and its complete action. Here's where the problem lies. Nobody in their right mind is going to convince a game master that it makes sense that a goddamn donkey or a riding horse or some sort of mule or similar creature can cope with trying to dodge and be engaged with a bunch of angry, ugly, green orcs waving battle axes at it. This is one of the biggest problems with these rules, because what it suggests in its wording, because it's not very worded very well, is it suggests that a riding horse is capable of doing that. A war horse makes perfect sense. Don't have any problems, right? So that's what it suggests. This is why I hate mounted combat. I can't stand it in 5e. And I have no problems with it having a nice simple rule, but this is one of the things that needs to change. An independent mount retains its place in the initiative order. So, in other words, if it's a dragon or an independent mount, okay, then it gets to do whatever it pretty much wants to, not what the player wants to, but it acts independently. And what it's going to do is it's going to have its own initiative, okay? Bearing a rider puts no restrictions on the actions the mount can take. So, it moves and acts as it wishes. It might flee from combat. This is one of the things I want to point out, and everybody ignores this one little sentence. It might flee from combat, rush to attack, and devour a badly injured foe, or otherwise act against your wishes. I don't know why nobody seems to pay attention to this. And this is under the section, the best situation you could have is the mount is acting independently if you want it to get it to attack, right? Riding horses don't attack. War horses acting independently could attack. A war horse not acting independently can't attack. It can only do 3 actions: dash, disengage, and dodge. And it's got its movement. That's it. In either case, if the mount provokes an attack of opportunity, while you're on it, the attacker can target you or the mount. And this is another problem I think a lot of people sort of don't seem to realize. If you're going to take a mount into combat, you better make sure it's got armor on it, because it's going to get attacked. Okay? That's really all I want to do and talk about. Like, mounted combat is... I've made, I think, 3 videos on mounted combat, and I have deleted 2 of them because of the shit that I've had to deal with over the years. Trying to explain it, demonstrate it, and explain to people that it doesn't work the way they think. Because what they do is they take one sentence out of context in the entire thing, and they assume that it works. There's nothing very clear about the rules for mounted combat. You almost find everything about mounted combat is just a complete mess. That whole set, those 3 paragraphs need to be completely rewritten, because they make no sense whatsoever. This is why nobody likes those rules, because they aren't very good. It is also why I never intended during complex combat mechanics to talk about mounted combat. It was not on the list. So if you thought I was going to talk about it next week, I had no intentions of doing so. In any case, yeah, feel free to disagree with me. I'm probably going to ignore you. Feel free to agree with me. I probably won't ignore you. And seriously, you need to run mounted combat the way the game master thinks it makes sense, because the existing rules are really bad. All right, Michael. Hello, Michael. Michael is a patron. How are you, Michael? How are you doing? Hey, I've been gone for a while. My father passed away. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Michael. Lots to deal with. Things are slowing down. Okay. Well, look, I'm really sorry to hear that things haven't gone well for you, Michael. I know I used to see you in the chat and in the comments all the time. But yeah, if you're dealing with family and that sort of, that's really hard to deal with. I know what it was like when my father passed away, and it's not fun. I'm loathing the day that my mother passes away. I know it will eventually come. And as we get older, we lose more and more people, so it's really, really tough. Yeah, so a lot of people have probably never dealt with mounted combat because they avoid it. That's probably why. Let me go through the chat here quickly. But yeah, really sorry to hear that, Michael. Hey, I hope you managed to deal with this as best you can. Yeah. I know it's taken me years to get over my father's death. Anyway, and yes, I don't think there's anything wrong with attacking the mount rather than the rider. You know, that just means that the player character's staying alive a little bit longer and they'll lose less hit points. Yeah. I don't believe, I think there's no rules around when you come off a horse that you necessarily take damage, but I do know that there is, you will fall prone unless I think there's a dice roll involved when you're falling prone. So somebody is like, I'm going to give them a d6 worth of damage. I mean, it's up to you, but I don't think there's anything written necessarily in the rules for mounted combat, whatever you want to call them. If you want to call them rules, I wouldn't necessarily call them rules as such. I would say they are more of a guideline that's mostly useless to you. You really have to create your own. Anyway, the Patriot, the British guy, is charging Mel Gibson. Mel drops and plants the flagstaff as a pike, impales the horse. Standard tactic versus a rider charging someone on foot. Yes, it is very much so. Right, what do you got here, Derp? That point about a riding horse is not being capable of combat is great. I should have considered that, especially having been around horses. Yeah, if you look at reality, and we're not dealing with reality, we're dealing with a fantasy game, people. But if you're thinking about reality, a riding horse is designed to be ridden, bear a rider, to ride around, and they are skittish as. They don't do well when you start making... Look, all you got to do is wave your hands around, and a normal horse that's a riding horse will freak out quite often. There's a reason why you don't beep horns or make loud noises around them, because they run away. They freak out. So, yeah, you stick them in the middle of a battle, bad news. Bad news. I would consider all of the stuff on mounted combat designed by Wizards of the Coast to be useful. What you do is you write those rules on a bit of toilet paper, you wipe your ass with it, and you throw it in the toilet and flush it, because it's really not very useful to you. You need to just use your brain, like what makes sense. Okay, I have arguments about mixed types of movement by one PC. Oh, look, mixed movement in Dungeons and Dragons 5e is also really, really poor. It's a terrible set of rules. It's awful. It's so bad. It's not funny. Yeah. You can't walk 30 feet, swim 20 feet, and then fly 40 feet in one round when you have 30, 20, 40. Pick one. Yeah, I know what you're talking about here, Fred. And it's because, look, Wizards of the Coast did not make it very clear what's going on. The way that they describe mixed movement is not good. What they're doing with the Unearthed Arcana is worse. It's going to be much, much worse. Anyway. What do you think about illusions? If one creature realizes it's an illusion and informs others, are the others still fooled until the investigation themselves? What do I think, Derp? I think that comes down to your decision as a game master or dungeon master. What do you think makes sense to you? You've got to understand, well, I think too often we get caught up in the rules. Look, I know my channel is built on rules. This is a rules video. This is a rules live stream, right? But if the rules don't serve the narrative, okay, if they break what makes sense narratively, then there's something that you need to do to adjust the rules so it makes sense for your game. So I could see an argument being made, look, that's not actually an orc. That is an old man who has disguised himself with magic. And you say that out to everybody else. Yeah, okay, all right. Now we know it's not actually an orc. It's actually an old man who's probably cast a spell to make themselves look like something else. Illusion, okay. Or, okay, oh well, but I still see an orc. You're telling me there's an old man that's turned themselves into an orc, and it's an illusion because you've been poking them. But I can't actually see that myself. I still believe the illusion. Look, I can see the argument go either way. The problem with illusions has always been that, yeah, you decide what makes sense. I'm not going to give you a definitive on illusions. Everybody does it differently. Yeah. Illusions have always been one of the hardest parts to make rulings about. Yeah. We aren't reproduce we ain't reproduce them, demonstrate them. It's all judgment calls. Yes. So Fred Huber makes a really good point. No problem, Steve. I've got to go in a second anyway. I should be going to work. I'm running a little bit late now. But yes, it's always been an issue. It's always come down to game masters and dungeon masters. Allow your game masters and dungeon masters to make rulings on illusions, and game masters and dungeon masters, you just need to make rulings because it's the only way to get past it. It's one of the hardest ones to do. So there's no real right way to do it, unfortunately. Sorry to say, you just got to do the best you can. We are trying to play a fantasy world and use real world physics in a fantasy world and use game rules to represent that. That's a huge ask. That requires an awful lot of brain power and a lot of decision making. You're not always going to make a ruling that you like or somebody else likes, and frankly, it's like, that's how it is. You don't have to apologize for it. It's going to happen. It always does. As informing others about the illusion, I have always given the informed person another save versus the illusion at advantage or with a bonus before the advantage was part of the game. So, Fred Huber's solution there is not a bad way to go about doing it. You could say, okay, there's a better chance that you'll disbelieve the illusion, and we'll do that right now. Why not? So for example, like Wizards of the Coast rules, those are Jeremy Crawford's house rules, basically. And like every person in my group who's a game master, and they're all game masters, we all rule everything differently. So when he says we are masters of the rules, we kind of come to a general consensus now that we will accept that everybody who is game mastering in our group will run it a little bit different. And there are certain things we do exactly the same and certain things we don't. And that's all right, Okay, I'm going to be back next week to cover complex combat mechanics, which means another slideshow and some pictures and some writing and me talking for a while, followed by a lot of demonstration. I'm going to end this poll. It's pretty clear that, a few people found this hopefully somewhat useful. And clearly there are still plenty of people playing 5e, at least in the last month. And we'll do this 2 more times before I go on holiday, and then that'll be me for a little while. In any case, I've got to get moving, got to go to work. So a huge thank you to all of my patrons who support me on Patreon so I can keep running this program. I want to thank all of you who took part in the poll today, everybody who's been watching and listening, everybody who's been providing feedback in the chat. I do appreciate it. Even if you don't agree with me or I disagreed with something you said, it's all right, because we're allowed to have different ways of doing stuff. Okay, it's not a hanging offence. It's all right to have different ways of doing stuff. Even your interpretation of how the rules work. Again, why should it ever be an issue? It is just a rule. Okay, it is not like you are trying to kill somebody's puppy or subject them to slavery or take their life. So we should never want to get too caught up in those sorts of things. So, but huge thank you to Steve, Fred Huber, Michael, and Derp, who's been here, Pale Rider. There's been a bunch of you hanging out with me today who've been asking some good questions and providing some good feedback, and I do appreciate it. And keep doing it, Nacho Man, who was here for a short period of time as well. So yeah, huge thank you to all of you. And hey, look, wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the wee early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. You're allowed to pick on Crawford, Fred. Remember, how many times have we disagreed, Fred? More than a few.